After almost every single US men's national team camp, it feels like the team never plays to its full potential, with some rare exceptions. Despite the CONCACAF trophies, it still feels like the US men's national team can do more, that they can play better. So is that on Gregg Berhalter, the coach? Or are we overhyping these players and creating unrealistic expectations? Or is it both? Today we're going to be talking about all of that, or shall I say, we'll be debating it. Hi, if you're new here, I'm Filippo, and welcome to Tactical Manager TV, and welcome to a debate episode. Now listen, I'm no master debater, but today we're going to be debating the current US men's national team. Is Berhalter really the problem, or is it the players? The players are not blameless, don't get me wrong, but I think the coach is holding the US men's national team back. But today's guest doesn't fully agree with me. And that's what we're going to be debating, disagreeing, and sometimes agreeing. And the person, or shall I say, the guest that we will be debating on this topic today will be Joe Lowery, the founder of Backheeled, a regular of the Total Soccer Show podcast, and he has also done work for The Athletic and ESPN. I think we need more debates in US soccer with people that disagree with each other and people that agree with each other. So we're going to be trying to bring more content like this in the future. So hit the like button if you like it. It's a great way to tell us that you enjoyed it, and feel free to leave your thoughts in the comment section down below. Yeah, maybe you agree with Joe. Maybe you agree with me, which you should agree with me. But what I'm going to say here is we need more talks like this one. Okay? With that said, don't forget to drop a like in this video, and let's begin. Okay, everyone. Today we have an episode that a lot of you wanted when I posted this on Twitter, X, whatever the kids are calling it these days. Joe Lowery posted something on X that I'm going to put on screen here very, very soon, in a second or two. And I disagreed with it. Many disagreed with it. So we're going to have a debate. And we didn't talk much about this, so I don't know how much we're going to agree or disagree.
Sure.
I'm going to allow him to elaborate on his take. I'll put it here on screen. And I guess we'll go from there. There's not much of a plan here. But Joe, before we start, thank you for coming along. And how you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about the USMNT. It's something I spend a lot of time thinking about, writing about, talking about other places. So I'm excited to do it here.
So because I'm at home here, am I allowed to bully you?
Yeah, I think that's permitted. You sort of make the rules. So I think wherever you want to go with this is fine with me.
There's no rules. That's the rule.
Okay, there's the answer. This is like an old-fashioned sibling street fight right now.
I think US soccer needs more of actual debates, and you never know. We might end up agreeing on most things. We'll see how the episode goes, but I do think we're missing this quite a bit in the community, and that's what I'm trying to do. I just had, for example, this week released a promotion relegation episode, and then I'm bringing someone that's against promotion relegation, which would be completely against what I believe in.
So you've just got on like a suite of MLS owners then. That's what that's got to be. I don't know who this mystery guest is, but I mean, that narrows the field down by a bit now, doesn't it?
Surprisingly, it's not an MLS owner, which that shocks me even more. I prefer it though, because when you bring an MLS owner, there's like financial interest behind it. So it's hard to have a legitimate discussion because, I mean, the guy's defending his own thing. When it's a guy defending it that has no financial interest on it, it's fascinating to me. And that's what I wanted to bring along. And it'll be a fun one. But let's bring up the episode. Not the episode. Let's start the episode. So this was what happened. I'm going to let you read the tweet. But before, let me just put some context. This was tweeted after the United States defeated Jamaica in extra time in Nations League. It was a match where I think almost everyone was frustrated because we relied on a lot of luck to go through with an own goal in the last minute by Corey Burke from Jamaica. And then the United States just ran through Jamaica in extra time. But then Herc Gomez, this is more directed on Herc Gomez's tweet, obviously, or comments on ESPN. But many shared the same opinion as Herc. I honestly shared it as well, just to make that clear. I'll let you read your take right there, and I'll let you expand upon it. I'm going to give you the mic now.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, folks can see the take. I don't know that I need to read it all the way through, but one of the things that I believe really strongly about this sport, and I think a lot of folks would echo a lot of this, is that coaching is important. And this is some of what I said in the tweet. Coaches clearly have an impact on how games unfold to one degree or another, right? They pick the lineups. They have a general tactical imprint on the team. They get to run through the subs, all that stuff. What coaches are not is chess players. They're not chess players controlling all the different chess pieces. A right back is not a rook, and a central midfielder is not a knight. That's just not how soccer works. It's not real life. So my tweet was sort of in response to this clip from her, who I've had plenty of fun chats with over the years and I enjoy. Like, my tweet is in response to this narrative that we always come back to with the U.S. men's national team, which I don't know is always wrong, but I think at this point is very clearly boring. And that is sort of the crux of this tweet. Is coaching is important, but it pales in comparison to the importance of having really, really good players. When you look at the U.S. men's national team, there are tactical debates, and I love to get into the tactical debates. There are tactical question marks that we can have about this team, and I think those things are important and fun and relevant, but are they as important and as relevant as digging into whether the U.S. men's national team, the collective group of players in the player pool, are strong enough or performing to their collective level as a unit? Then I think that is like really where the real meat is. So we look at the teams that consistently perform well in international competitions. You're looking at the giants, right? You're looking at Argentina. You're looking at Brazil. You're looking at the top teams over in Europe. What do those teams have in common? Well, it's not necessarily that they're drawing managers from like the elite of the elite clubs. That's not real life when it comes to the appeal or lack thereof of international soccer management. Those teams have in common that they have the players who are playing and changing games in the Champions League, playing and changing games at the highest levels of the European game. And the reality is the U.S. doesn't have that right now. And I'd be much more interested, frankly, in having conversations about what the players do well and do poorly, while still acknowledging that, yes, Gregg Berhalter has some degree of influence. That's impossible to divorce. That is very, very accurate. But I'd be much more interested in those kinds of conversations. And that's where the tweet is coming from, just sort of being, frankly, a little bit sick of all the discourse because it's boring.
So I'll give you where, even with your expanded explanation, where I still disagree and what I do agree. There's a portion of that I do agree to not. I'm just going to try to be honest as possible as I can without being biased, because we all have
Sure.
our biases. But for example, if it's the United States versus the Giants that you mentioned, and we lose or we get crushed, whatever, you have that argument of the gap of talent with the players that they have. Right, we're playing Argentina and Messi scores a hat trick on us. It's kind of complicated to blame Berhalter. Could he have blame? Sure, he could have blame. But again, it's just he's facing a superior team, and again, it was the same argument in the World Cup when we lost to the Dutch. I was not happy with how we played, but the problem wasn't really losing to the Dutch, because I think most coaches that we could have had there, we weren't the favorites. Regardless of the coach we had, we were not the favorites. But then when we go to the Jamaica game, for example, specifically, Jamaica with their best players, I still think we have better players than them, even with their best players. And they do have some really good players that were missing. Pinnock, Bailey, Antonio, we don't have to get into that. But they were missing most of their starters. And one of the excuses we always give Berhalter's team is we're playing away. We weren't playing away. As a matter of fact, I think we were kind of playing an empty stadium. It was very neutral, but still in Dallas, so still in the United States. My overall point with Berhalter, and where I want to get with this is, and you talked a little bit about the tactics, the system. Well, you didn't dive into it, but you mentioned it.
Sure.
We can even go into that. It seems like when we look throughout the years, has he changed his system? At times, yeah, he has tweaked it, and we've seen him adjust a few games. The game that comes to mind when we talk about that is the England game. That's probably the biggest one, because I thought he did a great job there. Whether Southgate is an issue or he sucks, that's a different discussion. Berhalter got it right because he pulled a result against a team that had better players than us, right? And then when you look into other teams in the World Cup like Wales, Iran, I don't think they have better players than us when you look at overall. So my question is, do you think like your point that you made there is still valid against that Jamaican side, right? That's my question, because they are obviously worse than us on paper, and they have worse players. I think that's not, you're not even going to debate that. But how much of that is on Berhalter with his system that he doesn't like to change it very much? Let's be honest.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot. I think it's a great question. There's a lot of nuance that's needed in this discussion because soccer is a complicated game. It feels like we've figured out large parts of baseball and basketball, finally learning that 3 is more than 2 in the NBA. Like, soccer is still a really fluid game that it feels like we are still trying to learn exactly how to solve. So I think that is an important bit of context in all of this. As far as the U.S.'s struggles at times against teams that are inferior in terms of talent, right? And we're going to see that in the Copa America with Bolivia and Panama on the group stage. Those are going to be tests in and of themselves. I think there's a lot of different ways to go with this. The one that I come back to first and foremost in these discussions is, what is the hardest thing to do in soccer? Like what is the most difficult part of the game for any team? And I believe strongly Scoring goals, especially against low blocks, right? Scoring goals against low blocks. There's a reason why we see Man City, probably the best soccer team in the world, at minimum, like top 5, whatever you want to go with. There's a reason why every year we see them drop 2 or 3 games against vastly inferior teams who are sitting deep in a low block. This year, they dropped a couple of games. They dropped 3 games out of 4, but the one that stands out to me is the Wolves game. They're missing Rodri at the time. They cannot figure out a way to adapt without him, and they lose that game 1-0. It was a away game. They struggle. And there are 3 or 4 of those games every single season. And if they don't always end in losses for Man City, a team where the quality difference is much, much, much greater, I believe, against a team like Wolves than it is between the U.S. men's national team and Jamaica when you factor in the club, training time, and context and all of those things, right? Pep Guardiola has an advantage with his team that Berhalter doesn't have with his team. The fact that we get those trap games every year for a team like Man City, I think, has to open the door not to accept those games when they happen, because Pep Guardiola isn't saying, oh, it happens, whatever, we move on. Like, he's going to go through and analyze everything. And I would imagine that Gregg Berhalter and his coaching staff are doing the same thing. But those things happen everywhere, right? And so, again, I'm not saying this is a free pass for Gregg Berhalter, but I do think that's important context when we think about not just the U.S., but every team trying to go down and break down a low block. It is a very, very difficult thing to do in this sport. And we've seen the U.S. struggle with it time and time again. Now, what I will say about Gregg Berhalter is, I think one of my criticisms of him, and I tweeted in response to that initial tweet that I sent out, that I've criticized Berhalter before, and I will continue to do so. I did it for Backheel. I've done it for other folks as well. Like, he has been, I think, a little slow to adjust throughout basically his entire tenure with the U.S. men's national team. We can look at that in terms of personnel, sticking with Jackson Ewell and Will Trapp for a bit too long at the number 6. Granted, the next generation still was not quite there yet, but that felt a bit like wasted time to me. I think about even some of his tactics in possession and not really changing some of those things to play against the ball more a little bit earlier. And we do see the U.S. deliberately play against the ball when they can. We saw that for long stretches against Mexico. We saw low passing completion percentages because they're trying more difficult, more vertical passes. I think Berhalter's been slow with a lot of that stuff, and I don't think this U.S. team is quite as sharp at breaking down blocks as they could be. But to go out here and claim that the U.S. is the only team to struggle to break down a block, or at least to insinuate that, is just kind of nonsense. Like, that's just not how this sport works, and it's not a reflection of the U.S.'s struggles in a vacuum.
You know what? I 100% agree that breaking a low block is, well, we talked about how scoring is the toughest thing, and then when you're facing a low block, that's the toughest it can get to score a goal. But here's my question to you too. We always like to use the example of Pep Guardiola struggling to break low blocks. And I'm not comparing Pep to Berhalter, but they do have similarities in their systems. They're very into positional play.
Sure.
There's a lot of similarities in the way they see or want the game to be played. Obviously, Pep Guardiola is up here and Berhalter's off camera right now, but that's a different discussion. I would argue, and I've said this before, Pep's system and Berhalter's too, it invites the opponent to play a low block, because it's funny. Liverpool also struggles with low blocks at times, but we don't see it as much with Klopp. It's a different system, a different, I guess, like, way of like seeing the game. And even when you go more of like the Brazilian school of football or soccer in this case, there's different ways of breaking a low block, proximity between players, a little bit more fluidity. If your players are not through like positional play, which, if a team consistently plays with positional play, very often the opponent already knows kind of like where each player will be on the field. Obviously, there are moments in the game where they're switching. That happens regardless of the coaching. You mentioned that before. Of course, it's a chaotic sport. But if you go with that method, it's a lot easier to prepare your low block to face that team.
Well, more or less. Let me ask you this though. I think it's a valid point. Like, you come in, if you're Jamaica coming up to play the U.S. in the CONCACAF Nations League semifinals in Dallas, you sort of know how the game's going to go. And it feels like the U.S. knows how the game's going to go. What are the United States supposed to do about that? Like, Jamaica missing all those starters, playing Damian Lowe as like a number 8/number 10 defensively, which was hilarious and awesome all at the same time. Like what is the U.S. supposed to do in that situation? How are you supposed to flip the tactical script? I'm not sure against a team like Jamaica that you can actually do that.
Well, you can start, but the thing is, it has to be tried in friendlies and practice. One thing, and I always say this because I can go here and have a bunch of ideas, but one thing is to have a good idea with soccer. And most people that follow the game, study the game, and watch it for long enough, you can have ideas. Another thing is to implement it. And that's where you get the quality coaches. Me and you can come here with 200 ideas. It doesn't mean we can implement any of them. And that's where Guardiola, Klopp, all these guys, they're able to put that idea into play. And even Berhalter, he puts his idea into play. He's able to implement it. The thing is, the way we faced Jamaica, we knew they were going to play a low block. One, because we had a better team. Two, they were missing their key players, and their coach is accustomed to being an underdog. We knew that coming into the game. Yet, it was the same system where the fullbacks push high up the field, Pulisic tucks inside. The eights sometimes drift, not sometimes, very often drift wide to help on the build out. And I put a proposition that doesn't, I'm not saying Berhalter should ever listen to me, but I'm just saying there's ideas that can be tried. You can play with a double 10, maybe push Gio with McKennie high up the field and have a 6 that can maybe pass the ball a bit better. That's not maybe Yunus Musa that can only progress it forward by dribbling. We've seen that Musa is not the guy that will pick a pass. He can drag the ball forward by dribbling. There's different ways you can do it. Maybe you don't need Anthony Robinson so high up the field, can help on the build out with Dest. Not that Robinson's the most technical. There's different ideas that can be implemented.
Sure.
But Berhalter, even when he knows the opponent will play a low block, it's usually just like I made a joke. I don't know. Have you ever played Football Manager before?
A little bit. And then I got in and it was really complicated and I gave up.
Okay, so I'll give you an example here that I gave in a long stream, so I don't know if everyone heard it. My example is the following. Let's say when I was a kid and I played Football Manager, I would pick one tactic for a club that I'm in. Let's say Manchester United, and I would just use that tactic against everyone. I would just switch the players. I wouldn't care. As I grew and I started to understand the Football Manager game better, I would start the season already with maybe 2 to 3 different approaches for certain situations. Obviously, this is a video game and that's real life. But my overall point is I don't see him making that many adjustments. There's a few tweaks that he does, like against Mexico. We saw Gio dropping deep. The system was still very similar, but there was some minor adjustments. Tyler dropping even deeper at times, almost like a back 3. But overall, it's just very predictable. We never see him adjust. And let me ask you another question here. What would you say is a coach's job? Like all the duties he would have. It would be the player selection, the tactics you're going to bring into that game, and national team, the call-ups, right? The roster, which I think actually Berhalter's been doing a good job with the call-ups ever since he returned. Ego management, that's important too. And would you say they play a role on the, I don't want to use the word aura of the team, but it's just that when you see like an Atletico Madrid, they scream Diego Simeone, the personality of the team. And the problem is that goes into the intangibles. That's my issue with it, because we talk about like Tyler Adams. Tyler Adams has all the intangibles that come with it, which you don't see it when he's playing, right? The leadership and all that, like you don't really see it, but you know it's there. Do you think Berhalter lacks on that?
I don't think Berhalter's personality has always struck me as a little strange, to be honest. Like he comes across in kind of a strange way, and I've talked with him, a number of times before, interviewed him one-on-one. Like he seems like a nice dude. He doesn't always scream charisma in how he acts, but there have been basically a plethora of U.S. players who have given him credit for the culture that he's helped create. Like, obviously, I can't speak to this because I'm not on the inside. There's one quote from Yunus Musa that really stands out to me. I think he's talked about how, like, I love coming into camp with the U.S. and playing for my country. I found the quote. It's just really nice to bond with the guys, and when camp is over, you kind of miss them. Like, this is the environment that Berhalter has helped foster inside the U.S. men's national team. You think about all the dual nationals who have come in, a lot of key players that Berhalter's played a key role in recruiting to the U.S., almost college football style. Serginho Dest, Yunus Musa, I just mentioned him, Ricardo Pepi, Faloran Balogun, Malik Tillman, Johnny Cardoso. Like, those are 6 players that are in all likelihood going to be on the 2026 World Cup roster. 2 of them almost certainly are going to be starting. And maybe that could look like 3, probably not more than 3. But I think that culture and some of the intangible side, it is pretty hard to deny that Gregg Berhalter has had a pretty big role in fostering in a positive way. I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier. 2 things. The adjustments. I don't think we can give him credit for adjusting in a big way against England, changing the shape to a 4-4-2, putting Haji right on the field, changing Tim Weah's. I don't think we can do that and then come in the next breath and say that Berhalter doesn't adjust. And I also would put more stock in the adjustments. We saw 5 new starters from the semifinal against Jamaica to the final against Mexico. Different in possession structure with Gio Reyna dropping back deep to form a back 3 on the left side of central midfield. We hadn't seen him drop back quite that deep before. And they were noticeably more aggressive with their passing against Mexico. So I think there were some pretty clear and obvious adjustments there from the first game to the second game.
How much is that on Mexico?
Yeah, the opponent obviously plays a part. You talk to any coach and they'll say, like, yeah, we have to go and look at how the opposition play and we have to set up and be aware of what they're doing. I think that's all fair, but those are legitimate adjustments, just like the ones against England that you referenced first, right? Those are adjustments against an opponent, not in no small part because of what that opponent wants to do, but those are adjustments nonetheless. In terms of to go back to the low block stuff, because I think the low block stuff is what often ignites the most chaos online, because it's frustrating, right? It's frustrating when you watch a team bang their head against the door and just not being able to find the handle, right? It is incredibly frustrating as a viewer. I think about the players that the U.S. have, and if we want to come back and put blame on Gregg Berhalter, which I'm fine to do in certain ways, right? I know you are as well, and this comes back to me thinking ultimately we agree much more than we disagree on a lot of this stuff, and people who were irritated at my tweet just didn't read very well. Like, I think, honestly, you look at these U.S. players, and a good way to tell maybe how or not Gregg Berhalter is influencing them in a positive way with the men's national team. Okay, let's go look at how they play with their clubs, right? Let's go look at what these players are doing. And I think about the profiles of players that are best against low blocks, players who have great close control, press resistant, good vision, good off-ball movement, good understanding of spacing. As far as I see it, the U.S. has one of those complete players, and that is Gio Reyna, who I think is so clearly the best and most talented player in this pool, and I don't think it's particularly close. Weston McKennie, at times a good long ball player, good at crashing the box, not super good in tight spots at times, and is mercurial, right? He's not all that consistent for club or country. Yunus Musa still hasn't developed his passing game and is not an every game player for AC Milan at this point. Christian Pulisic is not a super tight spaces kind of guy. He's much more effective in transition. Like Tyler Adams is not a classic through ball threat or deep lying playmaker. Like I guess my question for you is I don't understand, or my statement for you is I don't understand where the U.S. is supposed to pull out these like lock pickers. Like where are these guys? I honestly don't see them in the pool, and I don't understand where folks that had issues with my original tweet. Like, I don't know, are they expecting those guys to fall out of the couch cushions? Like, am I just missing these dudes and they're not in rosters? I don't understand.
I mean, there's a couple things to talk about there. I'll pull the tweet mainly because I think I can point out what I mainly had an issue with the tweet. I don't know. I can't speak for everyone else.
Sure.
Some people do not read on Twitter. That is true. I did read, and I'll point out to you in a second here. Gio Reyna played 75 minutes against Jamaica.
Yep.
Right.
And changed the game. Changed the game
yes.
so clearly. He was fantastic. He was so good.
And exactly. And you just mentioned when it comes to breaking low blocks, you do need a player that is press resistant, can pick a pass. And it was quite clear how different the U.S. was, even in the second half, that we weren't perfect. We were better with him on the field. So the first question is like, why did Berhalter start Tillman over Reyna?
Well, we sort of know we sort of know the answer to that, right? Gio Reyna hadn't been playing with Nottingham Forest. There have been reports about him being injured. Berhalter had given an interview to The Athletic talking about, we're going to have to be careful. There are other guys in his position that we're looking at as well. I have a really hard time reading much further into it than that.
It just seems that when water hits Berhalter's ass, he learns how to swim. That's the thing that seems to me. Because in the World Cup too, he starts Jesus Ferreira against the Dutch, which I wanted to give that guy the benefit of the doubt, but everyone was kind of like, okay, the guy didn't play any minutes in the World Cup. We don't like, and he seemed completely like out of it, Jesus. And then he throws Gio Reyna at the 9 position to start. It just seems like he understands that maybe he thought Tillman was good enough to pick a lock there, but he's not. There is a gap between Gio Reyna and Tillman. It was quite evident. It was quite evident this camp that we saw that. But just to show you, I think, just to make it clear, my main issue was this part of the tweet here, red herring, because what's the point that I'm trying to make here, just so I can make it clear? It's that it's not smoke on it, right? It's like, I think Berhalter, I legitimately think, and we're gonna get to that at the end of the video when we rate Berhalter. I'll talk about that. I think he is a legitimate issue for this team. And I think it's even a good moment for us to transition to a part of the video that I want to talk about, which is, what do you think? Like, do you think Berhalter has done anything more in terms of accomplishments, anything more than the bare minimum? Because I don't think he has done. I think if you look at coaches from the past, we've seen coaches achieve the same or a bit more than Berhalter at times, with, in my opinion, less talent. I think he does have, you can argue players in their prime, age, sure.
Yeah,
we can do that. But I think in terms of talent, and you look at our bench, for example, against Mexico, we're pulling players out of the bench like Balogun, Johnny Cardoso, guys that are playing in top 5 leagues, which you go 20 years ago for the United States. If you're starting in a top 5 league, you're starting for us. And we're and it's not the case anymore. It's like, you can start in a top 5 league, play well, and you can still be a backup. Goodness, you can even not make the roster
Yeah.
depending on the player. Um, which, yeah, sure, we're not anywhere close to Brazil, in my opinion. France, Argentina, we're not close to that for sure. We don't have, in my opinion, a world class player, which these teams seem to have like 3 or 4 at the same time. But again, do you think he achieved anything more than the bare minimum? If not, why didn't we just go with a different option? Try
Yeah.
something different, because we have a 2026 World Cup coming up. And what I am envisioning right now, I really hope I'm wrong. If Berhalter's going to go there, I hope he finds a way to overachieve. But I kind of wanted us to try to overachieve. But
Mhm.
Berhalter, what I'm seeing is he'll beat most of the teams he's supposed to, and he'll probably crash out in the first team that's slightly better than him. That's what I'm seeing. And I'm seeing the Copa America too. Do you think he achieved anything more than the bare minimum so far?
Uh, Maybe ever so slightly, but not dramatically so, right? And the thing that sort of pushes me over the edge is the dual national stuff, which is a little intangibly, right? Like there's a little bit of nebulous stuff going on there. We don't know exactly what role he's playing. Also, the guys and the fact that this is just a really young team that has to play a big part in it, right? When you have the chance to go play with Tyler Adams and Weston McKennie and Tim Weah, like those dudes seem cool. Like they seem like fun people to hang around with, and I think that's appealing for people like Balogun and Dest, although Dest is always in his own little world, right?
My
Yunus
favorite
Musa,
player.
like I think it's appealing for these guys, but Berhalter surely deserves some credit for all that stuff. So I think the ability he has provided in terms of adding talent to the pool is real, and I think that does tip him over the edge for me. What I will say is I think the results have been pretty much bang on expectation, right? You make it out of the group stage at the World Cup. Seemed fitting. I agree with your assessment of the relative quality of all the teams in the US's group at that 2022 World Cup. And you lose to the Netherlands in somewhat disappointing fashion. Tyler Adams makes some uncharacteristic defensive mistakes, and the attacking play just isn't there. And the whole Gio Reyna nonsense is floating around in the background as well. Like you didn't really overachieve in that tournament, and you didn't really overachieve in World Cup qualifying, and you didn't really overachieve. Well, you haven't really overachieved since the World Cup, and
I
I
would
would agree.
argue I would argue in World Cup qualifying, what matters is qualifying, but I would
Sure.
argue he underachieved during the
Yeah, there were some
campaign.
bad moments. There were some
Yeah.
bad moments in World Cup qualifying. Really strange and slow adjustments on the road in
We
Honduras.
qualified on goal differential, which
Yeah.
was not expected. I expected us to not qualify rounds ahead of time, but I expected it to be semi comfortable, like a good 3 to 4 points, like 2 rounds.
It was there were some dicey moments in World Cup qualifying. There's no doubt about that. It seems like there are always those moments, regardless of who the manager is. But I'm not trying to excuse that stuff because that Honduras game and the lineup that Berhalter put out and the changes that were there, like and same with Panama, like that's probably some of the hardest I've ever been on him. And I still don't.
Canada away too.
Yeah, I think he would probably go back and I would imagine do some things differently if he had the chance. But no, I mostly agree. Like I think basically when it comes to the results, the U.S. have been bang on average. Like they haven't found a manager that and Berhalter doesn't seem to be the guy that's going to massively raise this team's ceiling. I guess, and from what I understand and from what I have heard from people that are better connected than I am, like people always talk about wanting that golden option for the U.S. men's national team to lead them forward. I don't know who that person is. Like, is it Jesse Marsh, who was
No,
involved in conversations?
no.
I also would agree. There's some subjective bias in there for me because I would prefer to play how Gregg Berhalter is trying to play than how Jesse Marsh plays, and just in terms of like watching that stuff. But Marsh wasn't super successful in Europe outside of the Salzburg situation when the deck was stacked in his favor. Patrick Vieira was mentioned at one point. My understanding is there were some pretty serious salary differences on that front. Maybe U.S. Soccer should have forked over the money. Is Patrick Vieira really like a difference-making manager? Didn't have a ton of success at Crystal Palace. Hasn't been crazy at Nice. Like, I don't understand where this savior for the U.S. men's national team is coming from. Like, I genuinely don't think that person exists. You go around and look at even better national team jobs in the U.S. Argentina, where do they find their manager? From the Argentine youth setup, Lionel Scaloni.
Well, but he
Where
had
did
time with Sampaoli. He was in a previous World Cup. He was around. Yeah.
Right, but he's not like a slam dunk. Oh my goodness, we got Scaloni. Like, thank goodness.
No,
Like
yeah, yeah.
that's not the reaction. And same with Gareth Southgate, who took his team to a third place game in the 2018 World Cup. That would have been made it to the finals of the Euros, made it to the quarterfinals. Like by all reasonable accounts, and I'm not always a huge fan of how his teams play. He has had success in terms of results. Didier Deschamps is not this like all-time incredible legendary club manager. Like those people just don't really exist.
But Joe, you're falling into some of like the Twitter takes that people put out there, because one coach that, if you go back to the end of the World Cup, probably the number one coach I wanted, and I've talked about this extensively. He's not a big time club coach. If anything, I think he's more of a failure at the club level because managing a club and a national team,
Is
it's
it
completely
Bielsa?
different.
Who are we talking
No,
about?
no, not Bielsa. It was Hervé Renard. We've
Okay,
seen him. We've seen him get national teams to punch above their weight.
true.
And in the World Cup, sure, they didn't get out of their group, but they were the team to defeat Argentina
Yeah, that
with a
was
little
fun.
bit of luck. And let's be honest here, Saudi Arabia is not really a good team. So
No.
um, I think what he did again was, and we've seen what he's done in Africa. That was the coach that I
I
thought was a good option and
yeah.
affordable. That's
Yeah.
something to
No,
point
no,
out.
I think that's fair. And I guess what it comes down to is I just don't believe that Hervé Renard like massively changes this team's ceiling. Like you can believe that. I just don't think we have the real consistent evidence to say like, oh, he can go out there and pull another Saudi Arabia Argentina level upset again. Or like he can go out there and noticeably march the US further along. When you have players, like it or not, folks, like players that go out of their way to praise Gregg Berhalter and say that they like playing for Gregg Berhalter. Tim Weah did it when Gregg Berhalter was not back for the second cycle. This is not my opinion. This is just fact about what the players have said. Tim Weah comes out unprompted and says how much the players like Gregg Berhalter. Yunus Musa comes out and says in an interview to Michele Giannone how much he loves Gregg Berhalter. Like this group very clearly seems to enjoy playing for him. When you have all those players whispering in your ear and saying we want them back, that's a bit of a dangerous thing because at times it can lead you down bad paths. And I think the U.S. women's national team with Vlatko Andonovski, where the players seem to like Vlatko, and he was very clearly tactically holding this team back, the women's national team. We saw it at the Olympics. We saw it at the World Cup. Like it can be a danger, but it is a data point. And it's a pretty strong data point when you have a group of players that is as bought in as this group seems to be under Berhalter. So I don't believe that Berhalter is the best option out there. I don't believe that he is like so obviously the guy to help the U.S. win a World Cup or make the semifinals or whatever. I would be very surprised if the U.S. make a deep run in 2026. But to be honest, to go back to the point I made earlier about the player pool, which we didn't touch on again, like the lock pickers aren't there. Like Gio Reyna is the guy. We saw a huge drop off to Malik Tillman. It's not McKennie. It's not Musa. It's certainly not Adams. It's not Jedi Robinson. He has trouble with close control at times. Serginho Dest is not a difference maker in the final third. He is in the middle third in terms of ball progression. Balogun's still trying to find his way, although I do think he is a real potential difference maker for this team. Like it's just not there. Like it's just not there for this group to be a consistent and expected threat at a tournament. And I honestly don't believe, this is my viewpoint. People are obviously welcome to disagree. I am just not sure there's a manager that's within U.S. Soccer's reach who could dramatically transform this team.
What's in your opinion forget coaching for a second, just
Sure.
the player poll, based off the player poll, and very quickly, so then I can make my point on this too. What is the ceiling for this team in the Copa America and the 2026 World Cup? And I understand this is a complicated question because you don't know the
Yeah.
groups, you don't know but what would be the ceiling in your head for those? Well, you do for the Copa America, but the
Like,
World
yeah,
Cup
yeah,
you
yeah.
don't.
Like the furthest I could possibly imagine them going, or what I think is reasonable.
The ceiling of, well, of course, ceiling, you can say win it, you're in it, you can win it, but like a
Right.
reasonable ceiling, you're like, you know what, making it to a quarterfinals would
Okay.
be something that wouldn't shock you. Just be like, oh,
I would
good World
say
Cup.
a semifinal appearance at the Copa America would be fantastic. I
Hmm.
think it is a much less likely option than making the quarterfinal round and losing to Brazil. If the U.S. finishes second in their group and Brazil topped their group, that would be the matchup out here in my neck of the woods in Glendale, Arizona. I think that is so clearly the most likely option, although Brazil haven't been high flying at the moment. But a
Well, they got
semifinal,
back now. They beat
yeah,
England
fair.
and Spain.
True,
Yeah.
true.
So
Man,
that's
some
bad
of
for
those
the
friendlies were
U.S.
so fun. Lamine Yamal, man, some crazy stuff happening in the last international window. I think a semifinal is unlikely but possible. And at the World Cup, I think a round of 16 exit, to be honest, is the most likely thing for the U.S. men's national team. But I think a quarterfinal run is possible. Like I would extend it one layer deeper for the Copa America than the World Cup.
So I think that, and I'll say the Copa America, I have the same assessment. I think um, we're probably going to have to pull an upset to
Yeah.
go to the semifinals because the way Colombia is playing right now and the way we've been playing, I would say it would be an upset for us to defeat Colombia under
Mm.
the current circumstances. I do think we have the players to defeat Colombia at home, but this team they've been playing very well, and one can argue, like you mentioned, Brazil, Colombia has been playing better than Brazil. But World Cup, I think a reasonable ceiling, and I understand that there's an extra knockout round in this edition than previous ones. So when you say round of 16, you're saying beat the first round and
And
lose in the
then make it
second
past the
round.
round of 32. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. So you're saying you would win one knockout round stage, which we did in 2002. Obviously, playing Mexico, not a giant by any means, not a bad Mexican side, obviously not like the current one. But my overall point is, it's at home. I do think this generation is better than previous ones on paper in terms of also experience at a higher level in tougher competitions. I mean, the players you mentioned, sure, they're not world class players, but they are performing in the best leagues in the world. Pulisic's doing just fine, not just fine, doing very well in
Yeah, he
Italy.
is.
Anthony Robinson is doing very well in the Premier League. Tyler Adams has proven time in and time out he's a Premier League player. Johnny Cardoso for Real Betis in La Liga. I mean, McKennie in it. I can just keep going forever. Much different from in the past. The problem I have with this is this player poll. To me, the ceiling in the 2026 World Cup, a realistic one, right? Because someone can go in the comment section now and say we can make it to the semifinal. Yeah, sure, with the right amount of luck and good form, sure, you can do that. I just don't think it's very realistic. I do think quarterfinals is realistic, and should be the goal. The main reason I say that is the first knockout round we're gonna be seed one. So I'm gonna put it this way: being seed one, we will get a favorable group,
Mm.
assuming that, and we're playing at home. So I'm saying get first place. If you get first place, you might even play a third place team
Yeah.
because some third. So you have to get through that round. That means we would essentially need to pull one upset to make it to the quarterfinals.
Right.
And I think if we fail to do that, and people are saying, well, you can't demand the coach to beat a team better. But I mean, what else can we ask for? Like, I'm not asking for Berhalter to consistently pull an upset, but can we get one?
Hmm.
We got it with Bob Bradley. Even Klinsmann could pull a few here and there, and even the World Cup pull some. And it's not a draw with England. It's like have, and I'm not gonna pull that Jesse Marsh thing, but have a marquee moment
Yeah.
in U.S. soccer's
Get
history. And I don't think Berhalter's that guy. I don't think he has it in him to get that going. Will we probably defeat the teams that are inferior? Yes. And we had the chance to move on from Berhalter because he was away for 6 months and we were in the search process. And why not get a guy that's like, hey, is he better than Berhalter? I don't know if he's better than Berhalter. And most things in life you don't know until you actually put it on the field in soccer. But this guy has done it more than once with different national teams, like Hervé
Sure.
Renard, for example. Why are we not trying something different? Clearly, Berhalter is good enough to do the bare minimum. We agree on that, like the bare minimum. But also, clearly, he looks like the only way he's going to achieve something a little bit better than the bare minimum is if he gets luck, which honestly, if you look at Berhalter's time, he's had luck multiple times
Yeah.
to get the bare minimum. He's had luck in multiple occasions, like
Well,
the Jamaica game.
to drill into the luck point, and you kind of said it earlier, Saudi Arabia's win over Argentina, they needed some luck. They were absolutely
Yeah.
battered in that game. They had fortune with finishes. So, we're talking about these other managers. When you pull an upset, you might need a little bit of a boost on your side from somewhere. I,
But
I
Joe,
think,
Joe, before you continue, they were lucky. But remember what Hervé Renard did, the offside trap he did against Argentina. They were expecting a low block Argentina. That's not what they got.
sure. Yeah.
There's that too.
Yeah, it's a fair point.
He
Argentina
switched. He was like
still,
did something unexpected, which Berhalter would never do. We know how he would face Argentina.
I don't know, man. We talked about the England game 3 or 4 times now, and how there was a pretty significant change there in that setup. I think it's completely valid to criticize Gregg Berhalter. I said that in my Twitter thread, and I to be clear, I have criticized him before. I am still skeptical that there is another manager out there that is just such an obvious and gettable improvement on what he's done. Is it impossible? No. And would it have been a good idea to change anyway? Maybe. Like I'm entirely open to the idea that, okay, you ran through your first cycle. Like let's move on and find someone who can build on what you've done and try to, maybe have a slightly different voice. I think that's completely fine. Like I have no issue with that. And I don't understand Matt Crocker. I was at in person Gregg Berhalter's like rehire press conference and was asking questions. And Matt Crocker talked about how when they rehired Gregg Berhalter, like they were basing a lot of the metrics on the data side, basing a lot of the metrics off of the previous cycle. And I was a little confused because, well, then of course Gregg Berhalter is going to pop up well in some of the metrics that he helped create. So I don't know if there was a bit of a mistake there from Crocker, U.S. Soccer sporting director Matt Crocker, or if there was something else. I don't know. I don't feel especially strongly about this whole situation. In case that wasn't very clear to people, my original point has been and always will be.
I think
and,
there was a legitimate search. That's my opinion on it. Opinion.
Yeah. Okay. And obviously you're more than entitled to have that opinion. I disagree, but that's fine. Like my original point has been and always will be with this U.S. men's national team. Gregg Berhalter has done things that have been smart and good. He's done things that have been mistakes. I'm sure you'd be the first person to tell you that. The U.S. men's national team player pool is simply not at the level where we can expect them to go out there and dominate every team they play, come out there and create chances against Jamaica. Again, to reiterate, they do not have the profile of players that lend themselves to being able to even break blocks at a Man City level against their opposition. And we know that Man City have problems from time to time. And I don't think whether it's Irv Renard, whether it's Jesse Marsh, whether it's Pellegrino Matarazzo, whoever it is, right? I do not think there is a manager that is interested in coaching the U.S. men's national team that is actually capable of doing that stuff. And I don't really expect any of that to change. One thing that I think is interesting in all this is we're talking about the U.S. having to pull an upset. And there's part of me, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts. There's part of me that thinks this U.S. team is built to play more of the upset role. Like I think about what the games look like every time they play Mexico. They're dogfights. Like they're 50-50 balls all over the field. They're aggressive passing patterns in the U.S. It's a higher defensive block. Like all that stuff seems to fit how this group wants to play. We have seen Gregg Berhalter shift away from his infamous quote of, we want to disorganize opponents with the ball, which they've never been especially good at. We've covered that in depth at this point. Like we've seen the U.S. make a real concerted effort from that 3-0 loss in September of 2019, embarrassment in a friendly that Berhalter didn't seem to understand at the time why everybody was so irritated about, and used it as a training exercise. We've seen the U.S. dramatically shift in games against Mexico from that to having, 60% something passing completion percentage against Mexico in their most recent game, or whatever it was. I don't have the number in front of me, but it was low. That has been a concrete change, and this group loves it. Like you let Tyler Adams go out there and cover ground. You let Weston McKennie go out there and blow dudes up. Like they're ecstatic about that stuff. And I think as the U.S. continues to progress and has a chance in the Copa America, has a chance at the World Cup, to play teams that are going to control the ball because they can, and there are really no teams in the U.S.'s region that can, and at least that can do it at a higher level than the U.S., which says something about CONCACAF. There's part of me that thinks, even though we haven't really seen that signature win, which I think is true, by the way, we haven't seen that from the U.S. and we haven't seen that from Gregg Berhalter. There's part of me that thinks it could be coming, because when you let this midfield like cover ground and let the center backs win balls in the air and let Balogun slip in behind, like that's when this group is probably at their best.
Yeah, my concern is like we didn't see that against the Dutch, for example. Like I said, I don't think Berhalter's obligated to get this team to beat the Dutch, but it was just such a weird game because it didn't feel like the Dutch dominated us, but at the same time, it never really felt like we had a chance. That's how I got at the game. It's like we're playing fine. It clearly they're not dominating us, but it never felt like we had a chance. You could argue if Pulisic scores first, that go, but still, even when we scored with Haji, the Dutch came in right after and scored. I don't know. I haven't really seen that with Berhalter, and again, we hired him in a very iffy hiring process. Once again, the first one was already iffy. We don't have to get into that, and then this one was almost as iffy or iffier. Uh, Going on here, you mentioned a few positives of him. Yeah, I have spoken to a few players, and they've never seemed to have an issue with Greg, and most of them actually complimented him as a person. They never got into details about like coaching or this and selection, and I don't think they will, and I don't think they should. But they've all spoken highly. So unless people think they're lying to me, which I didn't get that impression at all, it seems like he does have the group on the palm of his hands in the terms of like them liking him. But I will say one thing, and I'm quoting MLS Buzz on X. You know MLS Buzz account? Ever?
I am familiar, yes.
Okay, so Alexi put something about that. Alexi Lalas put something, and his reply to Alexi was, I'm paraphrasing, so these are not the exact words, but he was like, when I was in middle school, I had a substitute teacher that would let us do whatever we wanted. So if they asked us if I
Sure.
preferred the teacher or the substitute teacher, I would say I prefer
Yeah.
the substitute teacher, which is a very valid point. I'm not saying this is the case here. That was a very good point, because a lot of the players, not a lot, I think all the players that came out and spoke positively of Gregg Berhalter were players that were getting a ton of minutes with him. If you go back, like Gio Reyna, obviously after the World Cup, that guy definitely wasn't for Berhalter. We don't even know if he still is. Definitely no issues there. But like Joe Scally made a few comments that were kind of like a little bit of a jab on Berhalter. Not really blatantly crapping on Berhalter by any means, but it didn't seem like he was endorsing him. A lot of players were quiet. That's another thing to mention, because I have no doubt that Pulisic, Tyler, Weah, McKennie, they all like Greg. But again, they're humans, and
Sure.
this guy treats them well, gives them
Yeah,
minutes.
and that's why I think it's important to clarify. And I said this earlier, like it can be a danger when every player is just telling you, like, "Oh, we love this guy, we want to keep him around," because maybe that's not the best thing for the team. Like the players absolutely should not decide that unless maybe we're talking about a Lionel Messi level player, but one of those isn't popping up for the U.S. anytime soon, so that's not super relevant.
If ever.
Yeah, if ever, and fingers crossed, right? But who knows if that's going to happen? Seems unlikely. No, I think that's totally fair. Again, like I don't see a ton of strong arguments for Berhalter to have to be the guy that leads this team in the 2026 World Cup. He's done some things well. He's done some things poorly. There have been frustrating moments. There have been good moments along the way. I'm just still sort of waiting for someone to come up to me and say, like, oh, here's who the obvious better candidate is, and here's why they're going to change the U.S. I mean, looking into Bernard, he won AFCON with the Ivory Coast, right back in, what was that, 2015, something like that. Didn't get out of the group stage with Morocco. Didn't get out of the group stage with Saudi Arabia.
Remember
And
the group he had with Morocco, though, and what happened?
Portugal and Spain in that group, right? Like a difficult group, but we're talking about overachieving. That would be overachieving, is getting out of the group and
I think
loses in the
Berhalter would not get out
quarterfinals.
of that group. The U.S. I think we would.
Oh
fail
no,
again.
wait, sorry, say that one more time.
I think the U.S., the team we saw in 2022, if he was in the group with Portugal and Spain, I think we would have crashed out in the group stage.
Yes, which is my
Speculating,
point, right? It's that it's very difficult to go out and do that stuff. Bernard couldn't do it with Morocco. I also am skeptical that he would do it in that same group with the World Cup at the World Cup with the United States, and then he loses in the quarterfinals with France in the 2023 Women's World Cup.
Didn't he win the African Cup of Nations with a very weak team? Also, wasn't it Gambia?
Yeah, I mentioned the Ivory Coast win, and I don't know what the roster looked like back in.
No, but he won it with also, I think, Gambia. There's two.
I guess that's possible. I don't know. But like
there was two, yeah.
When we're looking at the last decade, like I don't know, is it that compelling of an argument? Does Marsh have that compelling of an argument?
It sounds like a better resume than Berhalter that just wins Gold Cups and Nations League at home against weaker opponents.
Maybe, right? And I'm willing to say maybe. Like I think it's possible. And Bernard, I mean, like I think he would bring real value to this team in a different way, and he would give a different look, and maybe that would be helpful. But I just don't see how anybody could honestly and genuinely say of the managers that are realistically have ever been or could be connected with this job, like that there's somebody who's so head and shoulders above what Berhalter has done in his track record. I just don't see it, man. Soccer ultimately, and I think everybody would agree with this, soccer ultimately is about the players. Like it is, the players play the game, the players make the decisions. It's not NFL, it's not the NBA where you get to call timeouts. That's not how this sport works. It is the players. And the US player pool, I agree, has gotten better. Absolutely, it has. It is getting stronger. I think it will be stronger in 26 than it was in 22. There's progress being made. But is there enough progress being made to make the US a top 8 team in the world on paper? No, not really. And as a result of that, any manager is going to have a bit of luck, a bit of fortune to actually go out there and do what I think some of the Twitter USMNT fans think the US should do, which is they see the Badge FC where there's 11 US players out there on the field and one's got a Juve badge and, oh, look, another one's got a Juve badge. We've got a few PSV badges over here. It's just not right. It's just not actually how this game works.
Well, I think that the fans have to continue to keep their standards up and demand, because the thing is, Berhalter, you can go ahead and say, Hervé Renard, you're not certain on him. That's fair. He hasn't coached the national team, and it's not like he's won a World Cup with the freaking Ivory Coast. So you're uncertain about him. You can go Marsh and say you're uncertain of Marsh. I personally don't think Marsh would even be a better option than Berhalter. That's a different discussion. But I think we have enough data on Berhalter that he will not pull that. Unless there's an unreal amount of luck, which, by the way, we could be right here today talking about a Jamaica loss at home, and you would probably be talking to me right now and saying, you know what, I am Berhalter out right now. This guy just lost to Jamaica's B team at home. Like, it's just this game, sometimes there's like one or two moments that can change your perspective on it. And then you go back to World Cup qualifying. We qualified on goal differential, which to me, right, the thing is, the overall point is we have enough data to say that if we want to achieve the bare minimum, Berhalter probably will get that done. I don't see him getting like a group stage exit in the World Cup. I think he'll advance on that. Same thing with Copa America. People are like, oh, it could happen against Bolivia and Panama. I think he'll pull it off. We'll get out of the group. But I also don't think he can find a way to beat Brazil. I don't think he can find a way to beat Colombia. And of course, we don't have better players than Brazil. I 100% agree with that. But we do have better players than Jamaica. And sure, we can't. There's individual mistakes, like A-Rob making a mistake against Jamaica early on and Joe Scally not covering the back post. How's that on Berhalter, right? He selected the right players. But again, the adjustments and everything, it just doesn't seem to be working with him. But I guess we're riding and dying with this guy, and
Yeah.
whatever.
And
Let me ask you this:
I understand
would
the
you want him
frustration
fired
about that.
if he lost to Jamaica?
Um, sure. I don't know. Like, does it not seem a little silly that if the ball goes off of Corey Burke's head one way versus another way, that we are talking about a drastically different outcome for
Well,
Gregg
I
Berhalter?
wanted him out
Like,
because I wanted him out as soon
well,
as.
and that's kind of my point is like, I think, is it really that much stronger of a data point towards Berhalter out if the ball goes off of Corey Burke's head? I think if you're going to make that decision, you need to be informed by the years and years of data that we have on Gregg Berhalter, not just that one individual moment and one individual game. If US Soccer decides tomorrow to go ahead and say, hey, we're going to move on from Gregg Berhalter, I think that is completely fine. I generally agree with you that there's not a whole lot that leads us to believe that this U.S. team is going to dramatically punch above their weight. So if you want to go ahead and make a change as a result, that's fine. I guess I would just push back on the reactionary nature to a semifinal CONCACAF Nations League loss to Jamaica based off of one moment. But if he was going to go, that's completely fine. If he's going to stay to the World Cup, I'm more inclined to believe that U.S. Soccer has asked around a little bit and said, hey, can't really find anybody else. Let's just go with Gregg for a couple more years and see what happens. So I don't know. I guess that answers your question. So like you're talking about the U.S. doesn't have better players than Brazil. I agree. Like, again, we're coming back to all this. I would frame this, though, as it's not that Berhalter can't get the job done against Brazil. Berhalter's not playing. Berhalter might toss in a bounce pass or two. Like, the guy's not on the field. He has influence. Yes. Yeah, right. He's got influence, but he's not the one playing. Like, it is the United States men's national team that cannot get the job done. It is the team as a collective that is not strong enough right now to be elevated. And you can toss Berhalter to the side of the road and add in Bernard, or toss Bernard to the side of the road and go add in, Jim Curtin, whatever it is. Like, my ultimate take on this, and I've said this before, I'll say it again. Like, I just don't see, like, who is the person? Who is the person that you think, okay, this is obviously the right decision? If you want to get rid of Berhalter tomorrow, that is completely fine with me. I think there is enough reasons for that. But I don't think there is this overwhelming pile of evidence that suggests that Berhalter is such a woeful option to lead this team.
But you just made the point for me. You literally just made the point for me. After 5 years, you are not sure on Berhalter. So the thing is, it shouldn't be him. If not you, but U.S. Soccer had just hired Bernard or whatever, Patrice Vieira or Marsh, whatever, if they had hired someone else, you still had time to sort of see if it was going in the right direction or not. But Berhalter, we have enough data, and after 5 years, even people that are like yourself that are not extreme towards like Berhalter out, you're not sure on the guy. No one's sure on the guy, and it's been 5 years.
Are you sure about Jesse Marsh after his failures in Europe? Are you sure about Bernard?
No, I'm actually sure that Jesse. I'm sure that Jesse wouldn't be.
Forget the specifics, right? Like, you can have the same conversation with all this stuff. And so if you want data, like, if you're not sure about anyone, right? If you're not sure about anyone, Wilfried Nancy would be incredible, right? It would be really fun to see what he could do with this U.S. men's national team. There's no sign that he's interested. If you're not sure about anyone, why do you not go with the guy who's built the culture for you, who's helped build the culture for you and help it sustain that? And a guy who the big players, the important ones that you need to deliver in big moments, not the Joe Scallies, no offense to Joe Scally, like not those guys, but Pulisic, Weah, McKennie, Adams. Like, why are you not putting at least some stock in what those players are saying ahead of the World Cup? I see where you're coming from. Genuinely, I do. I think there is something to be said for, we've tried this a lot. It doesn't really feel like it's working a whole lot. Realistically, I think if there's going to be one last decision from U.S. Soccer, it's going to be after the Copa America, not after the Nations League. Just in terms of timing, that does seem to make a bit more sense to me, rather than bringing in someone new right before your biggest litmus test. But like, I don't know. It just feels foolish to discount the fact that Berhalter's status is not more or less uncertain than that of any of the other managers that we can talk about connected to this job. The players seem to like him. The U.S. has made some tactical progress from 2019 to now. Those are positives, albeit small ones, but positives that I don't think can like honestly sort of be ignored here.
Yeah, I think that the fact of the matter here is the only way that I think no one speaking can really convince me that Berhalter is the right guy. Only Berhalter can, and he hasn't done it.
Sure.
That's the problem. But so we can close it right here. The last question. If you had to rate Berhalter's USMNT era as a coach, and that combines both cycles, okay? Because we have enough data on this cycle, and then you count like his entire time as a coach, from 1 to 10, 5 being average, 1 being horrendous, 10 being perfect. What would you rate, and quickly why? And then I'll tell you mine. Or if you want me to go first, I can go first.
No, I'll go first. That's fine. 5.5, 6, somewhere in there. I think Berhalter, as we talked about, largely has hit the nail on the head in terms of expected results over time. Generally speaking, I think that's probably true. And I think he gets a little bit of a bonus point, half point, full point, whatever, for adding 2 starters to the program during his time and generally raising the quality when it comes to dual national recruitment and creating a culture. So I think 5.5 or 6. And I don't really think it's any higher than that.
So slightly above average.
Yeah, like a little bit above average.
Yeah. I'll go. So obviously, people that think that I am a blind Berhalter hater will probably think I'm going to give him a 1 or 2. No, I'm not going to give him a 1 or 2 because, like we said, I do joke that he's the bare minimum manager because I think he's achieved for the most part the bare minimum. I'm going to give him a 4.5, slightly below average, because of the things he promised. Because again, you talked about the possession, but I remember one thing he said. He said, "Change the way the world sees U.S. soccer." He
Yeah.
did say that, and you can only do that by achieving more than previous generations. And he failed to do that. Now, he does have another opportunity. He has 2, actually, the Copa America and the World Cup. He does have those. They gave him this long leash, but he hasn't done that. It's below average. I think he's achieved more or less what he's supposed to with this player pool. You talked about already the World Cup, how he was expected to get out of that group, and he got out of that group. World Cup qualifying, he barely qualified, but that's what he was expected to do, qualify. Winning CONCACAF tournaments at home. You talked about, I talked about the level of CONCACAF. It's not great, right? And Mexico decided to just become ultimately like crap now, worse than previous generations at least. Like, it's just a coincidence, right? We get this better team, and then Mexico just like, you know what? Let me drop a little bit. It's like, but anyhow, with Mexico. So I'm going to give him a 4.5. I think it's been below average. I would give him average if he had achieved the bare minimum with some, not really extras, but for example, putting up a legitimate fight against the Dutch, losing it very tight, never felt that way, qualifying to the World Cup with a little bit of comfort instead of goal differential. That would have put it average. Now, I would easily bump it way higher if he had 1 or 2 overachievements. Which to me, I'm not going to go, and I think it was a good result, but I'm not going to go call, yay, we got the signature win of tying England 0-0. Like, good result. Congratulations. I thought you did a good job. I thought the players did a good job. Everyone did a good job in that game. And I thought Gareth Southgate is not the brightest when it comes to that. But that's what I'm going to give a 4.5. Is there anything else you want to add before we go?
No, not really. I think this conversation's been fun, and it does show that we agree on probably a whole lot more than we disagree on. And really the only difference is that you think there's somebody out there that's gettable, that could do a better job tomorrow, and I just don't. And I think that's the only disagreement. And to be honest, it's not even that big of a disagreement, because if we're both honest with ourselves, do we think an Irv Renard-led U.S. men's national team is like obviously going to hit the semifinals in 26? No, right? So I think pretty much we're on the same page.
No, I think this just gives us a better odds of hitting the quarterfinal. I don't think Berhalter will hit the quarterfinal. Neither do you, based on what you said. So, and even semifinals in the Copa. I just think that we need to get over the insane part of trying the same thing over and over again and not working with Berhalter, which we know it won't. I mean, that's all. But everyone, leave your thoughts in the comment section down below. Do you agree more with Joe? Do you agree more with me? Do you think we can get a new coach and he will magically turn this team better? Do you think we'll get a new coach and he'll elevate us a little bit, just enough? Or do you think Berhalter is actually the best we can get, like, or to get the results we need in the 2026 World Cup and Copa America? Thank you very much for watching. Go follow Joe on X. His handle is right below his head right there. And have a great day. Bye-bye.